I've been on a bit of an Irish whiskey kick lately. I don't know if lately is quite the right word, but it has a special place in my heart, right? And we all have something that's a little near and dear to us. And today I thought it'd be fun to sample a little bit of the green spot. Now, this is the regular green spot, one of their normal offerings. So we'll save some of the special editions for another time. But for now, we're just getting started with the original OG green spot, and then we'll move on. Let me know if you have any favorite of the green spot special editions that I should check out. I know there's a few of them. They do something new every year, so if there's one that you are partial to, please let me know and I'll hunt that down for the next green spot special. But for today, we just have the regular single pot still classic green spot. Green Spot is another part of the Middleton collection of brands, and the Green Spot is part of the Mitchell and Son brand. And they have various colors. I'll get into a little bit of the story of how they've become named after the spots, which seems a little unusual. But the green spot is, it's not really an age statement, but it's somewhere between 7 and 10 year. It's one of their most common offerings that's easiest to find. Some of the other color spots you can find around are the blue spot, yellow spot, red spot, and they do most of the playing around with in the limited editions in the green spot variety. And I've never actually tried some of the other colors. Yellow is the only one I've had that isn't, one of the green spot or a limited edition green spot. I haven't seen the blue spot around. I'm not sure if many people have seen that in the wild. I think that's a 7 year. The yellow spot is the older sibling that comes in at 12 years, and the 15 year is the red spot. So the reason you've got the colors and the story behind that is the original, they're not distillers, I'll get into that in a second, but Mitchell and Son used some paint, right? So they would take paint and stamp a little spot on the different barrels to indicate an age. So that's where you get that from. And the green spot, even though there isn't an age on it, it's somewhere between 7 and 10. And since you have to say the youngest whiskey that's in it, they would have to say it's a 7 year, which would be confusing, right? Because the blue is the 7 year. So I think that's why there's no age statement on the green spot. So in diving into this, I was reading about the story and the history that the Mitchell and Son company has, and it starts so far back in time as many of these old Irish and Scottish whiskies do. And this one, it's maybe not the whiskey story that starts in 1703. That's a very long time ago. So William Mitchell had a very close friendship with Robert, and this guy was a bit of a rebel, right? Or not a bit, definitely a rebel. He was killed, and because they were such dear friends, William declared that every son, the firstborn, well, he didn't specify son, I think he said child, but like who's gonna name a girl Robert? Getting ahead of myself. That they would name the firstborn child Robert. And here we are, 8 or 9 generations later, and the family is still carrying on that tradition today. So the firstborn is Robert, and Robert is currently overseeing operations right now. So the green spot is aged in a combination of ex-bourbon, very common, and ex-sherry casks. Again, fairly common. They don't really tell you the ratio though, so I'm not entirely certain how much sherry goes in versus the ex-bourbon barrels. But from how it tastes, I feel like they're using the sherry sparingly, I guess you'd say. So sort of like adding salt or something, like just a little extra seasoning, but it's not really the main character, right? That's more the bourbon aged whiskey. So it's crazy, and I didn't realize this happened, but apparently some of the distilleries, like back in the day, the 1800s, would like Jameson would distill a whole bunch of alcohol and it would come off the stills and they wouldn't age it themselves. They would actually sell it to someone. So that's kind of cool. Like if you want to go into business and you're like, I like this distillation process, fascinated by it. They like that whole aspect of it. But the aging process, like you have to store it somewhere, you have to keep track of it, you have to, figure out, okay, so it's aged in this kind of barrel, that kind of barrel, and then you have to like merge them into something and then marry them, or you just age them. It's like this whole thing. So some people, they've got their preference, right? The thing that they just do really well, and they're going to focus on it, and that's cool. So that's what they were doing. All right, so now that we know a little more about the aging and how the green spot and all of those got their name, let's dive in. Let's actually take a sip. So as you can tell, I've been into this a bit. It's one of, I don't know if favorite's quite the right word, but it's up there on the list, right? So I needed to do this soon before the bottle got, emptied. I do like the color on these. Like, it's not such a dark amber, it's just like a nice golden kind of amber. It just smells slightly sweet, like you get that like woody aspect from it, so you do feel like you're out in the woods in the fall, right? You've got maybe you were popping for apples or something, right? Like there's that kind of sweetness, but it isn't too spiced, right? You're just sort of out in the woods. You've just picked some apples. We haven't gotten quite into the fall vibes yet. Like it's not too spicy. It's just sort of fresh. So it's just delightful on the nose. I'm gonna give it a minute to just sort of sit. I do like them to open up slightly, but for the magic of editing, you're just gonna get to dive right into the tasting and you don't have to wait. All right, now we'll give this a little taste. So then on the actual palate, like the flavor of it, you do still get some of that appley goodness, but it's not like caramel appley or anything. It's more the honey. So the bourbon influence, the bourbon barrel influence is still there. I don't feel like they toasted it or they toasted the barrels or wherever they got the barrels from. They're not so charred that it goes into the caramel territory. You're still in like the honey sweetness. So we're still like very early fall. You still get the apple, you still get a little bit of spice, right? Because it's bourbon. It doesn't feel overly toasted. There's definitely some dryness, right, from the sherry component in there, or the whiskey that was aged in the sherry. So there's a little dryness there from that. I don't feel like there's so much there that you're getting any fruitiness out of it, right? Like you're getting more of the appley that you would get from the bourbon barrels themselves. So it's pretty nice, easy drinking. I feel like it would really stand up well in a cocktail. So if you were looking for something to maybe add a little ginger, add a little like, well, it's one of my go-tos, right? I like either just a touch of ginger syrup or maybe have some ginger candy with it, or add like a nice ginger ale, even if you are feeling the fall vibes. I don't know, I have a hard time doing that in the summer. But this is a little fresher, so you probably could make a more summery kind of cocktail with this. So I think the place that this whiskey has in my life, because it's a slightly higher price point, right? The green spot is maybe around $60. Sometimes you can get it on sale, US dollars, that is. And it's not maybe an everyday drinker, right? I mean, we can all hope to be at a point in our life where we can have something like that. It's just your daily sipper. But this is more like you just want to have like one nice glass. Maybe it's a hot summer day. I have a thing about the lighter, fresher tasting whiskeys in the summer. So that's what it happens to be right now, which is why I picked up a bottle of this in the first place. Also, random, it was at Costco and they only had one bottle left, and it wasn't like the best price, but it was still pretty good. So I did pick it up. I didn't want it to be left there all alone in Costco without any of its buddies. So I gave it a nice home. We're enjoying it here together. So it's okay. We adopted the whiskey from Costco. We didn't leave it alone. So speaking of special editions, as I was earlier, the Green Spot, I think this is a fairly regular special edition that they do, which I guess doesn't make it super special, but it's a limited release each year. There's only so much of it, right? So that makes it special. But they do finish it in former wine casks, which this kind of goes back to the history of the company a little bit. Like Mitchell and Son was a wine importer as well. So they were importing the wine, they'd sell the wine, they had this barrel, they're like, hey, let's branch out and then also go get this barrel filled at the Jameson distillery and then age it for a while, right? I mean, why not? You've got the barrels. I don't know if things really shipped very quickly back then on the ships, so you probably just got the barrel and like kept it. I don't know, you sent it back to the winemaker. Like, I don't know, that doesn't seem like something they would have been doing. So yeah, fill it up with some whiskey, man, age it, use that thing. But this fairly regular partnership, as far as I can tell, I mean, you never know when these things will end. But the Leoville Barton edition, so crazy story. There were a bunch of dudes in a couple, I think 300 years ago it said, so that would have been like 1700s. They decided, hey, it'd be pretty cool to start a winery. Now these Irishmen were looking around Ireland like, yeah, we can't really start one here, but we want to start wineries. This will be fun. So they just spread out like leaves to the wind across the globe and started wineries called like the wine geese, I think. So if you want to look that up, it's kind of crazy. If you're a wine buff, that might be kind of fun to look into. But one of them ended up in the Bordeaux region of France, Mr. Thomas Barton. So here we are, 300 years later, and a fairly famous whiskey distiller in Ireland decided, hey, let's branch out, let's find some partnerships with other companies that have Irish roots, even if they aren't necessarily in Ireland. Almost, it seems, especially if they aren't. And they've gotten some of their barrels. I almost said the other one has the Zinfandel barrels, and this, I think it's the Bordeaux because it's the Bordeaux region of France. So they get those red wine barrels, age the whiskey in them. The last like 12 months, I think it's 12 to 18 months, is the aging process at the end of this to impart a little bit of that flavor. So I've had that one before, and then I've also had the Chateau Montelena one. So that affiliation is with a Irish immigrant to America who then went over to Napa, California and purchased a winery and kind of got that world renowned in a very interesting way. I don't know if anyone knows the history or the story about Chateau Montelena, but that's the tie in there. So they took some of the Zinfandel barrels that they were aging and then sent those over to Ireland where the Green Spot Company put some of their whiskey in and it aged for, around the same amount of time, between 12 and 18 months. Just depends on how long it takes, right? Like this must be a hard job, but someone has to take a little bit out and test the barrels to see like, is this one ready? Is this not? And they do take varying amounts of time, right? Just for miscellaneous reasons like the wood, where they are inside the warehouse, all those different things. So once it's ready, man, that'd be a fun job. Then it gets bottled and we have the special editions. So I have had both of those before. I don't know if there are any others that are still available. You know what I mean? Like you sometimes have to go on the secondary market to get things, but those two are still purchasable, at least that I've noticed in liquor stores around town. So I'm looking forward to the next release, I think for next year. So for some final thoughts on the Green Spot whiskey, I like how it isn't too over the top, right? It doesn't feel like it's too much. It's just nice to sit down and sip on. You can really enjoy it. It's a little elevated, right? So you're maybe not gonna have a couple glasses of this in a single night. You're just, if you want one glass, I do like to pick this as my one glass, especially on a hot summer day. It's just a little fresh. There's not too much heat in it. I don't feel like it's adding to the warmth. Like if it's 90 degrees outside, I don't need warmth traveling all the way down and reviving me in the same way I may in January or February, that time frame. So I do like the ones that are a little fresher tasting, a little lighter. There's a bit of oakiness here, so I feel like it's a nice transition when you're going from September, which where I live around Chicago can still be really hot. So if you've gone up from Chicago to do some apple picking in Michigan and you've come home, and the Green Spot is just the perfect thing to have on that sort of an evening. Thank you so much for joining me in this edition. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. I'll see you guys in the next one.